In the spring of 2018, in a quiet cemetery in Frankfort, Illinois, a woman named Sharonrose placed a memorial stone into the ground. It was small, as gravestones go. There were no remains beneath it, no casket, no ashes, just a name, a set of dates, and 6 words etched in stone. Stolen from my life, still remains in my heart. The name on the marker was April Rose Zane, and the dates read February 25, 1960 to April 10, 1977. That second date, April 10th, was Easter Sunday. It was the day Sharonrose last saw her older sister alive. She was 17 years old. She walked out the front door, and she never came back. For over 4 decades, Sharonrose searched. She searched when their parents were still alive and hoping. She searched after both parents died in the same year, never knowing what happened to their daughter. She searched after her brother Billy was gone too. She searched until she was the last one left. And then, in 2017, she did the hardest thing a family member of a missing person can ever do. She had April legally declared dead. Not because she believed it, because after 41 years of silence, the law demanded a resolution that reality had never provided. This is the story of April Rose Zane, one of the oldest missing persons cases in the state of Illinois, and the younger sister who refused to let her be forgotten. April Rose Zane was born on February 25, 1960, in Chicago, Illinois. She grew up in the Roseland community on the city's far south side, a working-class neighborhood of bungalows and 2 flats where families like the Zanes lived close together and kids played on the same blocks their parents had. April's parents were Ted and Rose Zane. She had older sisters, a brother named Billy, and a younger sister, Sharonrose, the baby of the family. The Zane children attended All Saints School in the neighborhood, and April's early childhood was rooted in the rhythms of city life, familiar streets, nearby friends, the steady hum of a Chicago neighborhood where everybody knew your name. But in 1971, when April was 11, the family moved. The Roseland neighborhood was changing, a reality that played out across Chicago's South Side throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s as white flight accelerated and longtime residents moved to suburbs and exurbs in search of what they perceived as safer, more stable communities. The Zanes were part of that migration, but their destination was unusual. Rather than settling in one of the nearby south suburbs where many former Roseland families ended up, places like Tinley Park, Orland Park, or Homewood, they moved much further out, to Frankfort, Illinois, a small farming community roughly 35 miles southwest of where they had lived. The contrast could not have been more stark. Frankfort, in the early 1970s, was an old farm town, nestled along the Lincoln Highway in Will County. There were no busy city blocks, no corner stores crowded with kids after school. The population was small, the landscape was flat and open, and the pace of life moved at a speed that felt foreign to a girl who had grown up on the south side of Chicago. For the Zane parents, it may have represented safety and a fresh start. For 11-year-old April, it represented the loss of everything she knew. For Sharonrose, who was younger, the transition was manageable. But for April, who was old enough to have built deep friendships and a sense of identity in Roseland, the move was devastating. According to her sister's later accounts, April was a sweet and talented kid, but she could not adjust to the drastic change. She missed her Chicago friends intensely. As the years passed, that homesickness did not fade. It hardened into action. April began traveling back to the Chicago area on her own, visiting old friends who had moved to places like Hegewisch, Riverdale, and Calumet City, south suburban communities where former Roseland families had resettled. She would hitchhike to get there, a practice that terrified her parents, but that April, in the way of stubborn teenagers everywhere, seemed to regard as an acceptable risk. These trips brought her into repeated contact with law enforcement. She was arrested at least once for curfew violation. Her parents worried constantly, but April kept going back. She wanted to be with the people she had grown up with. It was not defiance for its own sake. It was longing, a girl trying to hold on to a life that had been uprooted. April attended Frankfort Junior High after the family's move and later enrolled at Lincoln Way High School in nearby New Lenox. But despite these markers of a normal adolescent life in her new community, the pull of Chicago never loosened its grip. Her history of running away, always to the same places, always to find the same friends, always eventually coming home or being brought home, would become the single most consequential detail in how her disappearance was understood by law enforcement. It was the lens through which everything that followed was filtered, and it may have been the reason she was not found. The day April Rose Zane vanished was a day layered with family significance. It was Easter Sunday, and it was also her father Ted's birthday. The Zane family had spent part of the day at April's grandmother's home, celebrating the holiday together. It was the kind of day that anchors a family's calendar, the two occasions overlapping, the generations gathered, the routines of holiday observance giving the hours their familiar shape. Then the family returned to the house in Frankfort to prepare for a birthday celebration for Ted. At some point that afternoon, April told her parents she wanted to go see her friend Sandy, who lived in one of the Chicago suburbs. Her parents gave their permission. The plan was straightforward. April would visit Sandy and bring her back to the house so Sandy could join the family for her father's birthday gathering. It was not an open-ended trip with no return time. It was a simple errand with a clear purpose, a specific destination, and a built-in reason to come back. The fact that April's parents granted permission suggests that on this particular occasion, they were not worried. This was not a forbidden trip. This was not April running away. This was a daughter heading out with her parents' knowledge and blessing, expected home within hours. Sharonrose, April's younger sister, remembers the last moment with the kind of clarity that only comes from replaying a scene 10,000 times. She was standing at the top of the stairs. She asked April if she could come along. April said no, but told her she would be back. Then she walked out the door. It was the last time Sharonrose saw her sister. After leaving the house, April made it to a payphone and called Sandy. During that call, Sandy told April she could not come out that day. It was Easter Sunday, and she had family obligations. The plan, simple as it had been, fell apart in a single phone call. April was now somewhere between Frankfort and wherever Sandy lived, with no reason to continue to her destination and, presumably, every reason to turn around and go home. That phone call is the last confirmed contact anyone had with April Rose Zane. The time of the call, the location of the payphone, and what April said or did not say about where she was or what she planned to do next. These details, if they were ever documented by investigators, have not been made part of the public record. And yet this phone call may be the single most important piece of evidence in the entire case. It establishes that April was alive and mobile after leaving the house. It narrows the window. It tells us that whatever happened to April happened after that call, after the plan changed, after the original purpose of the trip evaporated, after she found herself somewhere outside of her home, with no place she needed to be. What happened after she hung up that receiver has never been determined. She did not return home. She did not call again. She did not turn up in any of the familiar places. Not Hegewisch, not Riverdale, not Calumet City. She simply vanished into an Easter afternoon and was never seen or heard from again. There is a discrepancy in the official record that is worth noting. Most databases, including the Charlie Project, NamUs, and NCMEC, list April's date of disappearance as April 18, 1977. But her sister has consistently maintained that April disappeared on Easter Sunday, which was also their father's birthday, April 18th. The problem is that in 1977, Easter fell on April 10th, not April 18th. April 18th in 1977 was a Monday. However, in 1976, Easter Sunday fell exactly on April 18th, matching both the holiday and the birthday that the family associates with that day. Several databases acknowledge this discrepancy, and the Doe Network notes that April may have gone missing the year prior, in 1976, which would have made her 16 rather than 17. Her sister's memory of the day, the Easter visit to grandmother's house, the birthday preparations, aligns with the 1976 date. The official record has never been corrected. Regardless of the exact year, what followed April's disappearance was shaped by a single assumption: that she had run away again. Her history of traveling back to Chicago on her own, her previous encounters with law enforcement, her pattern of leaving and returning, all of it pointed, on the surface, to a teenager who had taken off and would eventually turn up. According to Sharonrose, officers told their mother words that would haunt the family for decades. April is missing because she wants to be missing. It was a statement that revealed more about the limitations of 1970s missing persons response than it did about April. In that era, there was no Amber Alert system, no NCMEC, no NAMIS database, no centralized infrastructure for tracking missing children. A teenager with a history of running away who failed to come home did not trigger the kind of urgent, coordinated response that such a disappearance might receive today. The assumption was that she would surface. And when she didn't, the case simply grew quieter. But there were details in April's life that suggested her disappearance might have been far more complicated and far more dangerous than a simple runaway scenario. According to accounts from April's family, April had been involved in babysitting for her older sisters, who were married and living nearby. It was a normal arrangement, a teenage aunt helping out with her nieces and nephews. But through those connections, April had come into contact with individuals involved in drug activity. According to her sister Sharonrose, the older sisters associated with drug users, and at one point one of the drug dealers had even suggested that April move in with him, in exchange for pushing pills. It was the kind of proposition that reveals how a vulnerable teenager can be drawn into dangerous orbits simply by proximity. April refused, but she went further than refusal. And this is where the story takes a turn that transforms the entire case. At some point before her disappearance, April reported several of the drug dealers associated with her older sisters to law enforcement. Her report resulted in arrests. For a teenager living in a small town on the edge of the Chicago metropolitan area in the 1970s, this was an act of extraordinary courage and extraordinary risk. She had turned on people who operated outside the law, people who had every reason to want her silenced, and she had done so knowing she would have to continue living in the same community. April was afraid, and she had reason to be. After the arrests, according to family accounts, April's mother began noticing a dark-colored car sitting outside their home. It would appear and sit there, its occupants unseen, its purpose unmistakable. Rose Zane would call the police, but by the time officers arrived, the car would be gone, and the pattern repeated itself: the car appearing, the call going out, the car vanishing before anyone in authority could see it. The family's anxiety grew. The message was clear, even if no words were spoken: we know where you live. At one point, the situation became serious enough that April went to live with her grandmother for a while, and in a detail that speaks volumes about the level of fear she was operating under, she listed her address as a homeless shelter rather than her grandmother's actual location, a precaution taken by a teenager who understood, perhaps better than the adults around her realized, that the people she had angered were capable of finding her, and that her safety depended on staying hidden. These details paint a picture that is starkly different from the narrative of a restless teenager who simply ran away. They suggest a young woman who had made enemies, real ones, with real motives and demonstrated willingness to intimidate, and who was actively trying to protect herself. Whether those enemies played any role in her disappearance has never been established by investigators, but the possibility has haunted her family ever since. The dark car, the arrests, the retaliation, the fear. And then, on Easter Sunday, April walked out the door and was never seen again. Adding to the family's pain was the behavior of the older sisters in the aftermath of April's disappearance. According to Sharonrose, they made no effort to locate April. One of them had never even told her husband that April was missing. And when Sharonrose later began her own campaign to publicize the case, one of the older sisters told her she was going to put a stop to Sharonrose's efforts. Sharonrose has stated publicly that she believes one or both of the older sisters may have known something about what happened to April. One of the older sisters is now deceased. The investigation into April's disappearance was handled by the Frankfort Police Department, a small-town agency with limited resources and, in the 1970s, limited tools for pursuing a missing persons case beyond the local area. In that era, there was no National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That would not be established until 1984, catalyzed by the abduction and murder of Adam Walsh. There was no Amber Alert system. There was no NAMUS database. There was no internet, no digital databases. I had no way to share a photograph of a missing teenager with thousands of agencies simultaneously. A missing persons report filed in Frankfort, Illinois, stayed, for all practical purposes, in Frankfort, Illinois, unless someone physically carried it further. The specific actions taken by investigators in the months and years following April's disappearance are not extensively documented in the public record. What is known is that April was entered into the NCIC Missing Persons database, the FBI's National Crime Information Center, which was one of the few centralized tools available to law enforcement at the time, and that her dental records and, eventually, her DNA profile were made available for comparison against unidentified remains. These are the actions of an investigation that continued, at least in some form, even as the trail grew colder. April did not have a Social Security number at the time of her disappearance, a detail that carries enormous investigative weight. In the modern era, a Social Security number is the thread that connects a person to nearly every system in American life: employment, banking, housing, healthcare, taxes. Without one, there is no financial footprint to trace. No employment records, no tax returns, no credit history, no utility accounts. If April had been alive somewhere in the years after her disappearance, the absence of this basic identifier would have made her nearly invisible to the systems that might otherwise have tracked her movements. It also means that if she did start a new life somewhere, she would have had to do so entirely outside the formal economy or under an assumed identity. In the 1970s and 1980s, before the widespread computerization of records, this was more feasible than it would be today. But it also meant that anyone looking for her had one fewer tool to work with. Sharonrose has expressed her belief that the Frankfort Police Department did not pursue the case with the urgency it deserved. She has spoken publicly about her feeling that the town of Frankfort did not want people to know a child had gone missing from their community, that the case was an inconvenient truth for a village that prided itself on being safe and quiet. Whether this perception reflects institutional indifference, the practical limitations of a small-town police department in the 1970s, or some combination of both, the result was the same. April's case went cold. The initial assumption that she had simply run away again hardened into a kind of institutional certainty, and the case settled into the back of a filing cabinet where it would remain for years. The silence that followed lasted decades. It was the kind of silence that reshapes a family from the inside, not all at once, but slowly, like water wearing through stone. Ted and Rose Zane lived with the uncertainty for 26 years. 26 years of not knowing. 26 years of watching the door. 26 years of wondering if the next phone call might be the one that changed everything. They never learned what happened to their daughter. Rose Therese Zane, Rosie as she was known, died on January 25, 2003. She was 75 years old. Ted died the same year. They went to their graves without answers, without closure, without even the cold comfort of knowing whether their daughter was alive or dead. They were buried at Rose Hill Cemetery in Frankfort, the same cemetery where, 15 years later, their youngest daughter would place a memorial stone for the child who never came home. Billy, April's brother, the second child in the Zane family, the only son, had died a decade before his parents, in 1993 at the age of 37. Billy had been a complicated figure by his sister's own telling. Not an angel, she said, but a person with heart. He had attended All Saints and Pullman schools in Chicago before the family's move, had earned a scholarship to attend Mendel High School. After the family relocated to Frankfort, he attended Lincoln Way Central. He became a carpenter. He loved music. His Gibson Les Paul Sunburst electric guitar was among his most treasured possessions. He was closest to Sharonrose, the youngest sibling. He taught her to drum by playing Grand Funk Railroad albums. He encouraged her in horseback riding and sports. He played a big role in keeping her on the straight and narrow. And then he was gone too. One by one, the people who had known April best were disappearing from the world, and the weight of remembering her fell increasingly on a single pair of shoulders. Sharonrose, the baby of the family, found herself carrying the search alone. The older sisters, the ones whose associates April had reported to law enforcement, the ones who, according to Sharonrose, had made no effort to find April after she vanished, offered no help. By Sharonrose's account, one of the older sisters had never even told her husband that April was missing. When Sharonrose began publicly advocating for April's case, one of the older sisters told her she was going to put a stop to those efforts. Sharonrose has stated publicly that she believes one or both of the older sisters may have known something about what happened to April. One of the older sisters is now deceased, and whatever she knew or did not know went with her. Sharonrose has described her position plainly. The only family she has left are her own children. She is the last one standing from the household she grew up in, and she has never stopped looking. Sharonrose began her formal search for April in 1985, 8 years after the disappearance, and she did not stop. Over the following 3 decades, she pursued every avenue available to her. She submitted her own DNA to law enforcement for comparison against unidentified remains in national databases, a process that required her to walk into a police station, offer a piece of herself, and wait for a match that might never come. She created petitions calling on the Illinois General Assembly to devote more resources to cold missing persons cases, gathering signatures from strangers who had never heard of April, but who understood that a missing person is everyone's problem. She maintained an online presence dedicated to April's case, sharing information across platforms and keeping her sister's name in front of the public at a time when cold cases could easily disappear into the noise of the Internet. Her efforts occasionally intersected with the broader national conversation about missing persons. When Amanda Berry, Eugenia DeJesus, and Michelle Knight were rescued from a decade of captivity in Cleveland, Ohio, in 2013, a case that briefly put missing persons back in the national spotlight. Chicago's ABC affiliate, WLS-TV, ran a feature on missing persons in Illinois. April Rose Zane was the first case shown. It was, according to Sharonrose, the first time her sister had ever been acknowledged by the news. Sharonrose watched as Amanda Barry's grandmother received the phone call that her family had waited years for. The call that Ted and Rose Zane had waited for until the day they died. The call that Sharonrose was still waiting for. Throughout her search, Sharonrose worked to have April's case included in every major missing persons database as they were created, a process that itself spanned decades as new organizations and new technologies emerged. April's information is now listed with the Charlie Project, NAMUS, NCMEC, the DOE Network, CUE Center for Missing Persons, and the Missing Persons Awareness Network. Her dental records are available for comparison. Her DNA profile is on file. An age progression image depicting April at approximately age 52 was created by forensic artists to show what she might look like decades after her disappearance. Her red hair perhaps faded, her face shaped by time, but still recognizably the girl from the 1977 photograph. Sharonrose has also indicated that she has an idea of where April's remains might be located, a specific area that, at the time of the disappearance, was a known shortcut. That location, she has said, is no longer accessible by foot or by car. The area has changed significantly due to road construction in the intervening decades. Whether this lead has ever been formally investigated by law enforcement is not documented in the public record. In 2017, after more than 4 decades of searching, Sharonrose made the decision to have April legally declared dead. It is a legal mechanism, not an emotional one, a way of creating resolution in the eyes of the law when no physical evidence of death exists. Courts require it after a sufficient period of absence, and the process is clinical in its paperwork and devastating in its implications. It does not mean that Sharonrose stopped caring. It does not mean she stopped hoping. It means she did what the legal system asked of her, and then she kept looking. The memorial stone she placed at Rose Hill Cemetery the following year, on April 18, 2018, the anniversary of her father's birthday and the date the family associates with April's disappearance, tells a different story than the legal paperwork. You do not design a memorial stone for someone you have given up on. You design it for someone you are determined to honor, even in absence. The dedication was held on the 42nd anniversary of the day April walked out the door. It was placed in the same cemetery where Ted and Rose Zane are buried, where Billy rests. The family is together in that ground. All of them except the one who started the vigil in the first place. April Rose Zane's case remains one of the oldest recorded missing persons cases in Will County and in the state of Illinois. Her DNA and dental records are on file with law enforcement and accessible through national databases. Her NCIC number is M5972085898. Her agency case number with the Frankfort Police Department is M08A6669. Her NAMUS case number is MP1689. 49 years after she walked out of that front door, the biological evidence exists to identify her. If her remains are ever found, or if they have already been found and sit in a medical examiner's office or a forensic lab somewhere, cataloged as a Jane Doe. In the era of genetic genealogy and investigative tools that did not exist even a decade ago, cases that were once considered permanently cold have been resolved in a matter of months. The science is there. The question is whether the right evidence can be found to meet it. The landscape of Frankfort has changed beyond recognition since the 1970s. The old farm town where the Zane family tried to build a new life is now a thriving suburb of nearly 25,000 people. Roads have been built where there were once dirt paths and shortcuts through open land. Developments have gone up where fields once stretched to the horizon. The very terrain of the community has been reshaped, and with it, potentially, the physical evidence of what happened to a girl who disappeared within it. Sharonrose has spoken about a specific location she believes may hold answers. A place that was once a known shortcut, now buried beneath road construction and development. Whether that lead has been pursued by law enforcement remains an open question, and Sharonrose once wrote publicly about her search. "If my sister is gone, somebody knows, and I have the right to bury her. If she is alive, somebody knows, and I am sure they would have a heart to let me know she's okay." That is not a complicated request. It is the simplest kind of plea a human being can make. Tell me what happened. Tell me where she is. Give me something, anything, after all these years. If you have any information about the disappearance of April Rose Zane, please contact the Frankfort Police Department at 815-469-4935. You can also submit tips through NCMEC at 1-800-THE-LOST. Dental records, DNA, and case files remain active and available for comparison. No tip is too small. No memory is too old. Every case deserves an answer. Every family deserves the truth. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Echo of Evidence so that cases like April's keep reaching the people who might finally bring her home.